Adrian grinned. I don't know, Lisa. Show me a move, and I'll judge. Lisa gasped dramatically. In the cafeteria. Please, my talents deserve a stage. Adrian chuckled, shaking his head, and Mira allowed herself to relax. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she was reading too much into the stolen glances, the too close moments. Maybe Adrian wasn't. Mira, her head snapped up before she could stop herself. Adrian was watching her, his smirk still in place, but there was something else in his eyes, something Lisa had never noticed. You didn't answer. Mira swallowed. What? The question. His voice was deceptively casual. Would Lisa make a good? Mira hesitated, then forced a small smile. Lisa is good at everything she tries. Lisa beamed. See. Even Mira agrees. Adrian didn't break eye contact with Mira. That's not what I asked. Her fingers tightened around her drink. There it was again. That tension. That trap. Lisa, still glowing from the compliment, didn't notice the way Adrian leaned back slightly, amused. He was testing her, pushing, and the worst part. Mira had no idea how long she could keep resisting. The rain had started just as they left school. A light drizzle turning into a steady downpour. Lisa squealed, dragging Mira under the nearest shelter, shaking water from her hair. Oh my God. I can't believe I forgot my umbrella. She groaned, hugging herself. This is going to ruin my hair. Mira exhaled, brushing damp strands from her face. She didn't mind the rain. It was soothing, the steady rhythm drowning out everything else. Adrian jogged toward them from the parking lot, running a hand through his wet curls. You two need a ride. Lisa perked up immediately. You're offering. Adrian shrugged, flashing that effortless grin. Unless you prefer waiting here till it stops. Lisa nudged Mira. See, he's a gentleman. Mira forced a smile, but inside, she was already dreading the car ride. Lisa didn't notice, of course. She was too busy chatting, her voice filling the small space as Adrian pulled onto the road. She talked about everything: the upcoming dance, the new teacher, the way she thought Adrian's cologne smelled amazing. Mira stared out the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. She didn't expect Adrian to speak to her, not with Lisa so eager for his attention. But then, you okay over there? Mira turned, caught off guard. Adrian's eyes flickered to hers in the rearview mirror. Just for a second, before returning to the road. Lisa laughed. Mira's always like this, quiet and mysterious. It's her thing. Mira ignored the comment. I'm fine. Adrian didn't look convinced. You sure? Lisa rolled her eyes. She just doesn't talk much. You should know that by now. Adrian tapped his fingers against the wheel. Thoughtful. Doesn't mean she has nothing to say. Something about the way he said it made Mira's breath catch. Lisa didn't seem to notice the shift in energy, but Mira felt it. The way Adrian's words lingered, the way the car suddenly felt smaller. Lisa kept talking. Adrian kept driving, but Mira, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The night air was thick with warmth, the scent of damp earth lingering from the afternoon rain. Mira had stepped outside for some air, away from the noise of Lisa's house, away from the conversations that felt too loud, too suffocating. She leaned against the railing of the porch, staring into the darkness, letting herself breathe. Then she heard footsteps, slow, measured. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. You always do this. Adrian's voice came from behind her, quiet yet confident. Mira's fingers tightened on the wooden railing. Do what? Run. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see him standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her like he had all the answers. I'm not running, she said. Adrian stepped closer, his presence consuming the space between them. Then why are you out here? Mira exhaled. I just needed air. A smirk ghosted across his lips. Or maybe you needed to get away from her. Her breath caught. Adrian didn't look away. You know she's in love with me, don't you? Mira swallowed hard. And you let her believe it. He let out a soft chuckle. I never said anything to make her think that. You didn't have to, she whispered. Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Then, before she could stop him, Adrian reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just long enough to send a shiver through her. Mira stiffened. Adrian, tell me you don't feel it. His voice was low, dangerous. Tell me you don't think about it. She wanted to step back, to put distance between them. But the railing was behind her, and Adrian was too close, his warmth, his scent pulling her in like gravity. He leaned in, his lips inches from hers, his voice barely a whisper. Fight me, Mira. She didn't, because, in that moment, every bit of restraint, every excuse, every ounce of guilt shattered. She closed the space between them. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant like a secret neither of them should be telling. Then Adrian's hand moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and Mira melted. It was everything she had been trying to ignore, and now there was no turning back. Mira pulled away first, her breath shaky, her heart pounding. What had she done? Adrian's fingers lingered on her waist, his eyes dark, unreadable. He wasn't surprised. He had expected this. That made it worse. She started, but no words came. Adrian didn't move back. He studied her, his voice soft. Regretting it already? Mira shook her head quickly, then stopped. I don't know. A slow smirk curled at the corner of his lips. That's not a no. She needed to leave, to put space between them, to think. Lisa was inside, laughing, happy, clueless. Mira took a shaky step back. This can't happen again. Adrian's eyes followed her every movement, like a predator watching its prey. You sure about that? She turned and walked away without answering, but she felt his gaze on her the whole time. And the worst part, she wasn't sure she wanted him to stop looking. The next few days passed in a blur. Mira couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about how it had felt so right, so natural, even though everything around her screamed that it was wrong. She kept her distance from Adrian. Whenever he came close, she felt a nervous energy buzzing under her skin, but she didn't dare look at him. She didn't want to acknowledge the way her heart raced when their eyes met, the way her breath caught every time he smiled. And yet, the harder she tried to ignore him, the more he seemed to invade her space. It started in the hallway when Adrian brushed past her, his shoulder lightly grazing hers. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the moment, but she felt it, the heat of his skin on hers, the pull that made her want to stop and turn around. Then, in class, when she was seated at the back, she caught his gaze across the room. His smile was slow, almost mocking, as though he knew exactly what he was doing to her. Mira looked away immediately, focusing hard on the notes in front of her, but she couldn't stop herself from wondering, did he feel the same? Later that afternoon, when the bell rang, she found herself walking to her locker, hoping to escape without crossing paths with him, but of course, that didn't happen. Adrian was waiting by her locker, leaning casually against the wall, a smirk already playing at the corners of his mouth. Mira froze, her heart dropping into her stomach. "Hello, stranger," Adrian said, his voice smooth, teasing. She swallowed, her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" "Just thought I'd stop by," he said, stepping closer. "You've been avoiding me." Mira crossed her arms, trying to ignore the way his presence made her pulse race. "I haven't." "Oh, really?" Adrian raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "I'd beg to differ. Last time we talked, you ran away." Mira felt a flush creep up her neck. She couldn't let him see how much he affected her. "I didn't run." He was standing right in front of her now, his presence overwhelming. He looked down at her, his dark eyes filled with amusement. "You don't have to be embarrassed," he said softly. "I won't bite." Mira's stomach flipped, and she fought the urge to take a step back. "Adrian," she started, but her voice trailed off as he reached out and touched a strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear gently. The simple touch made her heart race. "I know you feel it," he said quietly, his voice low. "You can't hide from me, Mira. Not anymore." Her breath hitched. She wanted to argue, wanted to push him away, but the words wouldn't come. She was too caught up in the feeling of him, his closeness, his touch, the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the world. But she wasn't stupid. She knew what this was. And more than that, she knew what it meant for her friendship with Lisa. Adrian, I can't. He tilted his head, studying her with that calculating look. You can. You just don't want to admit it. Mira took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't want to hurt Lisa. Adrian's eyes softened for just a moment, though the smirk never left his face. I don't want to hurt anyone, Mira, but I can't help how I feel. Mira felt trapped. She knew she should walk away, tell him to stop, to not push her like this. But a part of her didn't want to stop. A part of her wanted him to keep looking at her like that, wanted to feel that dangerous pull again. She started, but then she heard the familiar voice of Lisa calling from down the hallway. Mira, there you are. Adrian stepped back just as Lisa reached him, her cheerful face lighting up when she saw him. Mira exhaled a shaky breath, feeling the tension snap as quickly as it had built. Hey, you two, Lisa said, completely unaware of the storm brewing between her best friend and the boy she was in love with. Adrian flashed a smile at Lisa, his charm effortless, like nothing had happened. But Mira saw the glint in his eyes. He was still watching her, still holding that secret look that made her heart race. Lisa didn't notice. She never did. Mira wanted to tell her, to warn her, but she didn't. Because, deep down, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. The days that followed only made things worse. Adrian's subtle moves, his teasing smiles, and the way he seemed to always find a reason to be near Mira was almost like a game to him. And as much as Mira hated to admit it, she couldn't seem to pull away. She could feel it, the tension between them, building with every passing moment. Every time Adrian looked at her, his gaze held something deeper than just attraction, something that made her question everything. What was he playing at? And more importantly, why did it feel so impossible to resist him? Lisa, on the other hand, was completely oblivious. She still laughed at everything Adrian said, still hung on his every word, believing that the attention he gave her was something genuine. Mira hated herself for feeling the jealousy that crept up every time she saw them together. But how could she not? When Adrian looked at her, it was different. She could feel his eyes on her even when he was talking to Lisa, and it made her heart race every single time. One afternoon, after school, Lisa and Adrian were talking in the hallway, their laughter echoing off the walls. Mira stood at the end of the hallway pretending to look at something in her phone, but her attention was locked on them. Adrian was leaning in just a little too close to Lisa, laughing at something she said, but it wasn't just laughter. It was the way Adrian's hand brushed against Lisa's arm, how they stood a little too close to each other. Mira couldn't stop staring. Just then Adrian turned his head and caught Mira's gaze. His smile faltered for a moment before it came back, warmer, but more knowing. He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Mira's heart pounded. He knew she was watching, and something about the way he looked at her made her feel like she was the only one in the room. It made her want to run, to escape, but she couldn't. Instead, she turned quickly, retreating down the hallway, heart racing. She thought she was safe, thought she had hidden her feelings enough. But as she rounded the corner, she almost bumped into him. Running again, Adrian's voice was soft, but it was filled with that knowing edge that made Mira freeze in place. Before she could respond, he was there, too close for comfort. His hand gently touched her arm, stopping her in her tracks. Mira felt her pulse race, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't look him in the eye. She just... Adrian stepped closer, and his voice dropped to a low whisper. You can't keep running from this. From me. His fingers traced the edge of her wrist, and the touch sent a shiver down her spine. Her head spun. Mira, he continued, his voice so calm, so steady. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you don't want this as much as I do. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She wanted to deny it, wanted to push him away. But she couldn't, not when his touch was burning her skin, not when his gaze was holding her captive. Adrian smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile that told her he understood exactly what she was feeling. I know. He took a step back, letting her breathe again, but his eyes never left hers. But that doesn't mean you can ignore it forever. Mira's heart beat wildly in her chest as he turned and walked away. She stood there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think. She felt like she was suffocating, caught between the fear of what was happening and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. What was she doing? She needed to stop, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make herself walk away from him.